Hey, Kathy.
Do as I say, not as I do, Karthik. That's the message.
Isn't that always true?
Well, Saksham, do you want to start telling some jokes while we're waiting?
I really have only prepared for exactly the amount of time I'm allotted. So if I start 2 minutes early, we'll end 2 minutes early. And I'd rather just wait till we get to the time marker. They're all time sensitive too. So, yeah.
It's all about timing, Saksham, you know.
Exactly.
Like, and
exactly.
delivery of that punchline. So
yeah, exactly. And there's some background noises that go off, you know, laughter that gets cued and things like that. I really don't want it to interrupt the timeline.
Yes, in addition to comedic relief, I've tasked Saksham with keeping us on time today. So hopefully you guys will help him with that.
Well, do you have a big clock behind you, Saksham? Flash numbers?
One of the things I've been loving about these video conferences is you get to see people in their natural habitat. I had a call with our attorneys today, and we were comparing cats. Hers was on the window, mine was on the top of the couch.
As to our participants here, thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started shortly soon. I also have to say that if you were at the last workshop in this series, we had a musical number opening it up. So I kind of half expected another musical number to open us up. Anyone have a good singing voice?
Well, there goes my part of wanting to sing a song for everyone. So I'm scratching that off my notes.
Well, my daughter did give me a karaoke mic for my birthday. So.
There you go.
Right, my clock just ticked over to 1 o'clock. So in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure we still have a few people rolling in. That's just fine. Just a couple of things. We do have, of course, we are past the midpoint in July. We still have a lot of workshops left at the CTL, so be sure to check out the website on that. We're also planning our August. I can guarantee you August will be just as busy for us as July was, so expect lots of good workshops coming your direction. Other thing, a little bit of housekeeping for this workshop. Your microphones are muted and you cannot unmute yourself. It's just because since we have a panel. So be aware of that. If you have a question, you'll utilize the chat and they will direct you who to chat to as well. So should also mention that the group chat is disabled since we have basically a panel of folks who will be, so just if you do have questions, just be aware of who you are sending that question to. They will let you know who the correct person for that is. So thank you for joining us. With that, I will turn off my mic and turn it over to Brianna. Thanks.
Well, it's going to be Karthik. Thanks, Brian. Welcome everybody to the second part of our two-part webinar series. This is called Commercializing Academic Discovery, Guidance for Launching a Startup Company. First of all, thanks so much to Brian and the CTL for providing us a platform for the series. And the one housekeeping rule that Brian alluded to, if any of the audience members have a question that they would like to pose to our panel, please send that to me. I'm Karthik Gopalakrishnan, the Director of Licensing and New Ventures at the Harbert Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And time permitting, I will queue it up for our panel. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Saksham Narang, our MC for this webinar. Saksham is the Venture Advisor for HIIE. He works with our faculty, staff, and students to help navigate the transitioning of a technology from a university setting to the broader Birmingham ecosystem. Saksham helps identify resources both internally and externally in assisting with commercialization. And together with our office, he coordinates the process for launching a startup. So we have 3 companies on our panel today that have made progress at multiple different levels as ventures. So their paths with regards to the process, the management, the financing, and the stage of development are all different, as you will hear. And so I'm just, on that note, I'll turn it over to you, Saksham.
Thank you, Karthik, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the panelists and also our participants and all those that are on this call. You know, one thing I'll just highlight, as you can see the picture, I try to wear the same outfit because I've definitely grown out my hair during all this, and I'm hoping that you guys can, I hope you guys can tell that I'm the same person, but if not, I try to do it with my appearance. That being said, you know, it's very important for all of us to participate in things like this, especially during times of a pandemic and talking about startups and venture development. You know, I'm still encouraged by a lot of the activity that's going on with the startups that are going to be talking to you today, as well as just things that we see in our pipeline. So hopefully this helps kind of shed some of the dynamics and helps make everyone feel a little more comfortable with everything. I know this is prime time for me. Normally I'm sitting on my couch Googling symptoms of COVID-19 and what's the difference between that and a common cold. So I'm really excited about this, and hopefully you don't make me stand up because I'm still in my pajamas, but I did put this on for you today. So that being said, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'll start with Andrew Smith. We're going to do these introductions a little bit together, and I think that might be helpful. So I'll give a little bit of background about each of them, and then I'm hoping that they can fill in the gaps that I've missed. With Andrew, Dr. Andrew Smith is Associate Professor in the Department of Radiology at UAB. He's the Vice Chair of Clinical Research, Co-Director of Entrepreneurship, Co-Director of Artificial Intelligence, and Chief of Abdominal CT and Radiology. He's the Director of the Human Imaging Shared Facility and Institutional Core Lab, and serves as the Director of the Tumor Metrics Lab for the O'Neill Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Smith's clinical areas of expertise is in oncological imaging, and his research expertise is in AI-assisted imaging workflows and imaging biomarkers for cancer and other diseases. He is the inventor of several AI and imaging algorithms and has over 10 issued patents. He serves as the CEO of Radiostics LLC and AI Metrics, a UAB spin-off company. So with that, Andrew, can you please help me fill in some of the blanks and give a little more detail or emphasize a bit more about yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I will say that my hair has not changed and is certainly not growing longer and more luscious as yours is, but thanks. So the mission of my company, AI Metrics, is to leverage artificial intelligence, or AI, and provide radiologists and oncologic providers with imaging tools that enhance their workflow and improve the quality of care of cancer patients. So it turns out that cancer patients undergo CT, MRI, PET scans to determine if the therapy is working or not. And in clinical practice, radiologists evaluate the images and dictate multiple reports, but these aren't standardized, they're prone to errors, and they're inefficient. So at AI Metrics, we've developed an advanced image viewing platform that uses this transparent AI and guided clinical workflows to create a new standard of care in image analysis and reporting. So I'd like to show you just a quick demo of this. So we'll show a quick video and I'll talk you through it. So our first AI-assisted workflow guides radiologists in assessing advanced cancer response to therapy. And the AI assists with tumor measurements, labeling, and tracking over time. The AI works anywhere in the body, and the measurements and labeling are easy to edit, as you can see. A radiologist never has to take his or her eyes off the images to check for dictation errors, and all measurements and annotations are automatically stored. For follow-up exams like this one on the left, we built a tool called Autopilot that uses embedded AI to rapidly locate all previously measured tumors. This speeds up the process, and the AI improves accuracy and standardization. You know, at the conclusion of the read, the advanced reports are immediately available. We'll just take a quick look at those here now. So the output report includes a graphical report. It's crystal clear, easy to interpret, the one on the left. And there's a table on the right. This is particularly useful for clinical trial patients where data entry is a challenge. In addition to these reports, we provide key images here that we can show you. And these, these show each of the different tumors tracked over time. And we also have a structured report, a text report on the right that integrates with existing software. So collectively, these reports improve communication between the radiologist, oncologist, and patient. And we've also completed a multi-institutional trial. This is a landmark study with 22 sites, and we compared AI metric software to the standard of care with dictated text reports. And here quickly are some of our results from this. You can go next slide. AI metrics increased the accuracy by 25%. It was 2 times as fast, reduced major errors by 99%, and increased inter-observer agreement by 45%. So we believe we have redefined the standard of care. We're preparing an FDA 510K application for submission later this month. I'm really thankful to UAB for the support that made this possible. And we plan to use this technology at UAB to benefit our care providers and our patients. That's kind of us in a nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And that video is really helpful. I know you messaged us about it last night, and I immediately went to go find some stock footage to include in my intro, but I definitely could not live up to that. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. And next, we'll introduce Robert Agnew. Robert Agnew is the CEO of TruSpin NanoMaterial Innovation, a startup company which manufactures affordable nanofibers with unique properties. He met Anthony Breyer, the co-inventor of TruSpin's manufacturing process, in the UAB Anvil Student Startup Bootcamp program in 2019. After completing the program, Agnew and Breyer acquired a license from the Harbert Institute to commercialize their production process. Shortly thereafter, TruSpin competed in an Alabama Launchpad pitch competition and was awarded $50,000. They now operate from the Innovation Depot. So, Robert, with that, could you please help us also fill in some of the gaps?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Saksham, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm Robert Agnew. I'm the CEO of TruSpin NanoMaterial Innovation. Like Saksham said, we are using a breakthrough process that was conceived at UAB to manufacture nanofibers. Nanofibers are a new type of material, and they're so small that their diameters are measured on the scale of billionths of a meter. And because they're so small, they have special properties that make them useful in just about every industry you can think of. The problem that's been preventing their widespread adoption is the unreliable nature of previous production methods. They're slow and they can't reliably make nanofibers with the most useful compositions. TruSpin's process is unique in that it has a much higher output and it can mass produce nanofibers that are difficult, if not impossible, to make any other way. It also allows fibers to be collected in continuous lengths, and this makes the physical construction of useful products a lot easier. So in the past few months, we've targeted thermal applications, submitting proposals to NASA for a textile that would be useful for atmospheric reentry. But for the next few months, we're going to be focusing on refining the characteristics of a specific nanofiber to be used as an electrode in lithium-ion batteries. There are already a couple of companies doing something similar to this who've received hundreds of millions of dollars in investments from the likes of Mercedes, Airbus, Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google. These companies more or less have things figured out in terms of battery chemistry, but they don't really have a method of making their nanofibers on an industrial scale. So we believe that we can level up with these companies technologically, and then we can either bring value to them by providing that scale, or we can justify the funding necessary to become the kind of small scale battery manufacturer that's targeted by larger companies for strategic acquisition.
Thank you, Robert. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Next, we'll introduce Dr. Larry Lamb, who is the scientific co-founder, executive vice president, and chief scientific officer of Incysus Therapeutics. As a transplant immunologist with 27 years in experience in clinical translational immunotherapy research, he is responsible for first describing the association between relapse-free survival and homeostatic T-cell recovery in patients with high-risk leukemia following haploidentical bone marrow transplant. While at UAB, Dr. Lamb developed the scientific support for chemotherapy-resistant T-cell-based immunotherapy for high-grade brain tumors that has now become the foundation of the company's clinical programs. Dr. Lamb currently leads clinical, translational, and manufacturing strategy and operations for Incysus Therapeutics. And with that, Dr. Lamb, if you could please add on to that.
Yes, I just wanted to start out by saying that I was one of those very lucky people in life who managed to do my senior postdoc in a multi-million-dollar laboratory with a famous investigator. And we made our first observations in haploidentical transplant with T-cell depletion, and we used a T-cell depletion strategy that would help the patients, help us to prevent the patients from developing graft versus host disease, one of the major complications of allogeneic bone marrow transplant. And in that process, our laboratory identified a certain type of immune cell called a gamma delta T cell that was strongly associated, that large numbers of reconstituting gamma delta T cells were strongly correlated with survival. Survival really is meaningful when you're looking at the status of transplant in 1992, 93, because most patients coming to us had already exhausted all of their therapeutic options, and we were kind of the last stop for them. And an 8-year look back showed that the patients who developed this finding were still surviving. 71% of these patients were still surviving, where the ones that recovered normally, only 21% remained alive. We did a lot of biological work to outline this finding and to determine the activity of the T cells against leukemia. And then we were faced with the idea of turning this finding into a therapy. And over time, we did a logical succession of experiments that ultimately arrived at a platform that's unique in cell therapy now, called drug-resistant immunotherapy. One of the things that we found is that when we treat a tumor with chemotherapy for about the first 8 hours after it sees chemotherapy, it will develop stress antigen expression on its surface at very high density. The gamma delta T cell sees stress-associated antigens and uses that as a target to recognize and kill the tumor. In most situations, however, chemotherapy also kills the immune cells as well. So the body can't naturally take advantage of this increased vulnerability following chemotherapy that closely. So our initial strategy in brain tumors was to insert a gene into the gamma delta cell that makes it resistant to chemotherapy, which allows us to deliver chemotherapy and cellular immunotherapy at the same time. So the cells can reach the tumor and attack the tumor at a time when it's most vulnerable. I guess a good military analogy would be painting a target with radar and then firing a missile at it. We have 2 clinical trials in process now. One is at UAB in glioblastoma with Dr. Bert Neighbors as PI, and the other at the University of Kansas with Dr. Joel McGurk. And we're sort of midway through our history of funding. We're looking for a Series B at this point, and to expand the company and to enter phase 2 with these trials when the time's appropriate.
That's really interesting work. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'll just summarize this for the audience, but as you can see, we have 3 very diverse startups. You have a immunotherapy biotech company with Dr. Lam, and of course a materials manufacturing company with and Robert Agnew, and as well as a health risk decision-making AI platform technology and Andrew Smith. So you know, all of these companies, the reason we've selected them to be panelists on here, they've all went through a different process. They're all in different verticals, and they've all grown and scaled with different pathways. And so we'll highlight a lot of this in the next section. And I'd also like to conclude for all of them that in their free time, whatever may be left, they like to participate on webinars like this with us, and only to do so when asked. So we really appreciate them being here. That being said, we'll begin the Q&A part of this, and Andrew, I'm gonna put you on the spot and start with you. And I'm glad Bob's here as well. I can see that in the participant side. But you know, like I said, every university, UAB is no different. There's a process for transitioning a company out of the setting and moving into the broader Birmingham environment. You certainly went through this with AI metrics, and a lot of the narrative that we see on campus and discussions we have is, startups are risky. They're risky in nature, and not everyone is comfortable transitioning out with the startup. People like the current role they have. They like the R&D component, being able to have their lab and continue to do the good work they do at UAB. So I want to touch this with AI metrics, because you actually went and recruited a chief operating officer, Bob, and I was there to kind of help walk through some of the things with you. But can you describe it in your own words and in your own perspective how that went in recruiting the COO, and in a very active one that's kind of now helping you kind of scale the business on the outside?
Absolutely. You're right, Saksham. When you first do this, most of us come in as researchers, which I am. I'm a clinical scientist, so I have clinical part-time, research others. And we tend to focus on the writing of the grants, doing good science. And I was able to make the software, at least a basic version of it, through that. And then as you get further along, you're like, geez, we really need to commercialize this. So some of us think about like SBIR, STTR, small business type of grants. And when you really look into those do some components, but they don't get you all the way there. There's other things that they don't cover. So I really had to acknowledge that, and also had to learn very quickly that I just couldn't do all this. I just didn't have time for it. It's just not realistic. You need someone full-time on this. So once I acknowledged that, I began a search for a COO. And the Harbert Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship really helped me with this. So they put me in touch with a couple of potential candidates. And then once you meet those candidates, you start meeting other people and start getting into this network. I was looking for someone with prior experience in raising capital, because I certainly didn't have that skill set. And I needed someone who'd get in the trenches with me, someone who's self-motivated, effective on their own, good personality that connects with mine. Someone who also ideally has connections with local investors, because you're probably going to start there with local investors. So I met several strong candidates. Bob Jacobus stood out among them. He's been fantastic, added significant value to the company. One challenge is for paying for this. How do you pay for someone when you're just starting your startup, and finding a way to share equity and talk to this person? And the good thing is, like in Bob's case, he had experience with this and made it fairly easy for me to understand how to do this. And that's what I needed, is someone who had experience in this. So we use like a milestone-based approach. He hit certain milestones, and then big good things happen. And it was like, for example, when he raises a certain amount of funds, he gets a certain amount of equity. And so this whole process, that was a learning experience for me, but especially after doing it, only confirmed how much I needed help. And now I have it.
Perfect. That's really helpful. And and Bob's been fantastic, as you noted, and we've appreciated working with both of you guys to fulfill the needs that you need as a startup in the broader Birmingham environment. Having said that, Dr. Lamb, I'm going to pigtail off that conversation and talk about you, because you've done this in a different experience. You've actually left UAB as Incysus transitioned out. And could you kind of highlight what was your mindset in doing that? Was it juggling the time commitment, part of what led you to kind of focus on Incysus full time, or was the timing just right? If you could share that just with the audience, so they can see both sides of the equation.
Well, I've been very fortunate throughout my academic career to be pretty much continuously funded and able to, with NIH and charitable funds, to advance the work to the point of clinical trials. Then, of course, we hit the valley of death as, a common situation where the NIH really doesn't like to fund scale up and validation work, but we needed about $1 million to be able to take this from a laboratory exercise to clinical trials and INDs and that sort of thing. I was a little better positioned than some in that I was director of the clinical GMP facility. At clinical, but it was just funding just wasn't there. And we got some interest, actually serendipitously, through an investor in New York City, William Ho, who sat down with me for 3 hours and let me do my spiel. And I convinced him that the gamma delta T cell was pretty much the greatest thing since canned beer. And in doing so, he wrote a check to the UABRF for $1 million for me to do the scale up validation and regulatory work and submit to IND applications to FDA. I had a partner at Emory University who I was working with as well. He elected to stay in the laboratory and stepped away from being full-time with the company. But my situation with UAB is at this point in time, I was so conflicted that I was either going to start a new line of work or else I was going to go ahead with the company. So I went to do that as well. And that's why I transitioned in 2018. I wanted to add that when I talk to students, I usually put up a slide talking about this, and I say that it basically says that if you're a Ph.D. researcher, such as myself, you have to give up two things. Number one, when you go to clinical trials, you're going to give up the glory, because the guy giving the big talk at ASCO is going to be the physician that's executing the trial. And the second thing you're going to give up is control, because once you license this stuff out, you no longer have anything to do with it. The business controls it. And the only way to mitigate that is to step away from your academic position and become a part of the company, which is what I did.
That's really helpful. I think that's really good insight for a lot of people on this call, because I'm sure they're both, I mean, this is a part of forming a startup and looking at both of these avenues, Andrew, the one you've described, and Dr. Lam, the one you've described. So it's very relevant to how everyone's evaluating things as next steps if they want to move forward in a new venture. Robert, I'm going to come to you now, because we've talked a lot about company formation, team formation with Andrew and Dr. Lam, and you had kind of a different experience in that you found a co-founder at UAB, and you both transitioned the company out together. And the program that you participated in was, of course, the Anvil program. And now you're kind of looking at scaling TruSpin a little bit differently, and maybe not so much on the needs of team formation and time dedication, time commitment, things like that, but more on exploring other parts of venture development, whether it's fundraising, strategy, market, and so on and so forth. You and I have talked about some accelerator programs in Birmingham. Which ones are you currently reviewing? Are you considering applying to any? How are you kind of engaging the next steps for TruSpin beyond, I guess, the things that we've discussed with Dr. Lam and Andrew, just on that team formation and looking at new hires?
Sure. Yeah, you definitely have some opportunities with accelerators and programs that are similar to accelerators in Birmingham. When it comes to true accelerator programs in Birmingham, one that's going to be here year after year is called Velocity. It's in the Innovation Depot. They invest $50,000 with your company and provide resources for you to be able to cram a year's worth of progress into 3 months, 12 weeks. So Velocity is industry agnostic, meaning they accept applicants from any industry. And some of you might have heard that Techstars is coming to Birmingham. This is a world-class international accelerator that holds cohorts in cities around the world. And typically these cohorts are enabled by a corporate sponsor. In Birmingham's case, that's going to be Alabama Power. And the industry focus will relate to that corporate sponsor. We have applied to Techstars, and we're excited to find out about the results soon. So that's only 2 accelerators I've named. You might be able to name a couple more, but I can tell you that if you want to find out about upcoming accelerators or just keep a good pulse on opportunities like these, I recommend getting an account on F6S. It's the platform that a lot of accelerators use to manage applications to their programs, and it has a way for you as an applicant to find out about all these upcoming programs. And then in the same vein as accelerators, you definitely want to check out pitch competitions such as Alabama Launchpad, which is our state's premier pitch competition. So these events don't have a curriculum or a mentorship element like you get in an accelerator, but they do challenge you to learn and grow. And I'd say in that regard, they accomplish many of the same goals as an accelerator. They'll compel you to write just a dynamite business plan and refine the way you tell your story again and again. First time we applied, we didn't even get through the first round. So this is a gritty trial and error learning process. But those are the lessons you tend to retain. And, I'd say many of the participants here today know what it takes to bring their A game in their respective fields. If you want to find out what it takes to bring your A game in business, engage with something like Alabama Launchpad, because it'll challenge you to rise up to that level.
Mm-hmm. That's really, and rise to that level, and you also won. So congratulations again on that. So we know that we're really proud of that at UAB. Andrew, I'm going to come back to you because we're getting to the mode of looking at external resources here in Birmingham, and you and Dr. Lammer, Incysus has used this one, and we do encourage engaging this one, but it's Alabama Capital Network. And I'm gonna talk to you about this because it's your pitch to them was very recent and very relevant. But could you talk about Alabama Capital Network and to the audience in this webinar? This is a local angel group here in Birmingham, and of course they represent all of Alabama, but they invest in startups that are locally based and are trying to scale, and it's a group of angels or high net worth individuals that are willing to write checks to exciting companies like this. And of course, a lot of them want to support UAB in the community. And Andrew and AI Metrics, Bob as well, just went through this process with them. But could you tell us a little bit about your experience, Andrew, with ACN?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you said, ACN's Alabama Capital Network, and they really provide a great opportunity to pitch your company to a large group of local investors. And that's what this is. These are angel investors, high net worth people, as you said, and they don't necessarily all come together. It's not a venture fund, but you pitch in front of a bunch of them, and some of them may take a real interest in it. And we've had several that have followed us for over a year now, and some are ready to start committing some funds. When you start this process, you're trying to figure out how to put a pitch deck together. And we got some help from that, both from the HIIE helped us with that. We've had some sessions with you guys. The ACN administrators actually helped too. They don't want to put you in front of their group of investors unless you're ready. And so they'll work with you. And this is a process. I'm a bit of a natural speaker. It's a good quality for a CEO of a tech startup. The material of a good pitch is different than that of a research presentation at a national conference. With any good talk, you need to prepare the right materials and rehearse so you can deliver this fantastic pitch. I'm on YouTube. I'm looking up things on Google, trying to find other pitch decks and learn how to do this. There's a bit of a transition there. And I wish I could say that we just immediately jumped to something fantastic, but it took me some time. It's something you have to work at, and you get better at it. And people really push you to figure out, well, what exactly is our market here? You think you know it until you really zero in on it. So the truth is the pitch evolves and gets better with time, especially as you do some customer discovery and you start going out talking to potential customers. This allows you to really zero in on what matters. So for us, it was really helpful. The Alabama Capital Network, once you meet with them, even if that investor you're not meeting with is not necessarily going to invest in you, they may know one or two more that would. And so we've used that as a bridge to scale up to meet other investors as well. So it's been very helpful.
Great. I'm gonna pull the conversation back to a little bit at UAB, because we always talk about startups launching from the university setting kind of being the hand that feeds itself, in the sense that when these businesses scale and they raise capital, of course, from the community and create that economic impact, they also look to UAB for a lot of resources for development as well. And Dr. Lamb, if I could ask you this one, and you've touched on it a little bit, but you have a clinical trial going on right now at UAB. And so could you talk a little bit about, and while we're not going to get jealous that you're engaging another office besides us, could you talk a little bit about how you're engaging across campus? You said you still have a colleague there. I'm sure you've had to deal with the Office of Sponsored Programs, but now that Incysus has raised capital, is kind of in this validation clinical phase stage, how are you, and what's that process been like for you to kind of re-engage UAB now coming from the outside kind of back end?
Well, I can answer that in two parts. Part
Sure.
of it was that, I was just kind of naive to this whole process when I was coming through it. It was, I just kind of did my thing in my lab, and, when it came time to start engaging these resources, nobody knew anything about it. It was a cocktail of reception with the dean, explaining it to him, and he said, "Oh, who's doing this?" And the vice president of research went through an hour-long presentation that I gave him, and he said, "I never knew any of this was going on." And so one of the pieces of advice I could give is I tend to be, not much of a self-promoter, but I think you need to kind of get out of that mold a little bit to start the buzz going when you're thinking about doing this. And the second thing is we do have several Birmingham investors, and they've been just wonderful in following us, and that sort of thing. As far as the clinical trials network is concerned, I've always known that UAB has a very, very strong cancer clinical trials enterprise. We've got, of course, the core grant from the NCI as a comprehensive cancer center that provides the resources to be able to engage with us, both intramural and extramural trials. The people actually who in neuro-oncology, neurosurgery, clinical system laboratories have been really great, very proactive. But I think a lot of this has been coordinated, a lot of the business work has been coordinated through two individuals who have been overwhelmingly helpful. One of them is Kathy Nugent, who heads up the Enterprise Institute. And the other is the UAB's counsel, Helena Christine, who has sort of helped us clear a lot of conflict of interest and legal barriers and IP issues that pop up along the way. And I can't really complain about the reception we've had. It's been very good.
Great. That's great to hear. And both of those people are fantastic, and obviously big supporters of what we're doing right now and startups as well. Robert, I'm going to come back to you because we're just kind of pulling it back into UAB and the resources that they provide to startups. You and Anthony participated in our Anvil program. What was your experience like, and how did it kind of prepare you for TruSpin, in launching TruSpin? I know that's where you obviously met Anthony, your co-founder, and went through the program together to really kind of solidify a business plan, a strategy, and a potential launch. So if you could just highlight that experience for everyone here.
Sure. It was a fantastic experience, and I would recommend UAB's Anvil Startup Bootcamp to anyone eligible at UAB who's interested in starting a company. Some of the students that we met when we first got there were there because they already had a small business and they wanted to cultivate better business skills as an entrepreneur. Anthony was there because he knew that the subject of his research had commercialization potential, and he wanted to learn more about business and meet other people who could contribute value to a team. Regardless of what brought people there, everyone who participated in the program got out of it what they put into it. The curriculum's second to none. You'll see all kinds of top-notch guest speakers from our business community. By the end of the program, we had a company formally established. We went straight into tech transfer, and right about the time that was finalized, we won the $50,000 at Alabama Launchpad using skills that we gleaned from the startup bootcamp. So it was just a fantastic experience all around. Really helped us become who we are today.
Great. That's great to hear. And I know you and I work together, obviously, with Anthony as well, and kind of evaluating the needs of TruSpin. So it's great to hear. It was helpful. Andrew, I'm going to circle back to you because while you didn't go through a program, you initially kind of developed this technology at University of Mississippi. We've talked about this, and you brought it over to UAB. How did that transition and then the resources that UAB provided you kind of help catalyze the development process for AI metrics and kind of support the things that you are ultimately concluding to now?
Right. Yeah. So I started this kind of journey when I was at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. That's where we had a prototype of the software built, and I was the vice chair of research and radiology there. It turns out 3 years ago, actually before that, including the recruitment process, is that UAB needed a new vice chair of research and radiology. UAB had and has an outstanding cancer center, and that's what our technology is about. And they needed someone to run like our tumor metrics core lab, which is exactly what this software does or where it would apply. It can apply to clinical practice too, but that was a great starting point. So it was really an ideal matchup, very good for me, to have a potential larger cancer center who needs someone with this service. I'm building this service. So that was good. And I was a grant funded researcher. So as a grant funded researcher, sometimes you get some startup funds for your research lab. And I was able to work that out with HIIE and figure out how to make the software, how to use the funds appropriately, following state rules and things. So we got something started there, and I landed some additional grants. And that's never really enough for most of these startups. So we had to start getting some investor funds. So we were able to transition that. And I think it was really the HIIE helping me to be able to transition that and think about ways to expand the funding. So a little bit about alignment, working with the HIIE, and it really involves a lot of people. If I look back at it, it's UAB Legal's helping, compliance, the IRB, you're talking to them, you're talking to the Conflict of Interest Review Board, the CIRB, the Office of Sponsored Programs, the Entrepreneurship Development Committee that we'll hear about later in the talk here. I have partners in radiology and School of Medicine, Cancer Center. It's a lot of people to sort of coordinate. And this place had all of that and was just really looking to expand innovation. So it was very attractive to me, and it was a good move in the end. It was a very good move for me.
That's great to hear. And you know, one thing I just want to highlight for the audience, because you've touched on a lot of the steps of our process with the CIRB, the EDC, and we're going to talk about that as well later on in this webinar. But it is a process, and what I'm sure Andrew can encourage, and everyone can encourage on this call, and I certainly can for everyone, is not to be weary of that process. It is a process, but it's the benefit of you. It's the benefit of your company. It really helps you kind of flesh out the details, understand your role, evaluate the resources, and then hopefully encourage you to ultimately do a venture. Would you agree with that, Andrew?
I would. I think if I was listening on this and didn't know about all those organizations, I might write them down and think about where are all the roles here. And if you can't do that on your own, that's what the HIIE is here to do, is to say, hey, you know, this is how we guide you. So a very good starting point is you guys. It was for me.
Right, and we are happy to do a lot of hand holding, and it's a learning experience for us. It's a learning experience for obviously you guys, and it's a learning experience for the university. But I think ultimately the goal is to continue launching startups from our pipeline, because that is something that, you know, everyone's looking forward to. We know Birmingham's looking forward to it, and of course the community is there to support it. Dr. Lamb, I'm gonna come back to you, because I think a theme of some of the things you've touched on is you've just been at the right place at the right time, and being in a UAB and transitioning Incysus out has been no different, because you were able to do that before I think a lot of this process was put into place. You know, if you could kind of touch a little bit about what that experience was like for you, because as Andrew mentioned, there was some check boxes essentially. Now we have a checklist or formal checklist of how to transition a company out. But when you did it back in 2017, 2018, that checklist was not so, I wouldn't say it wasn't there. I just wouldn't say it wasn't evident. So could you talk a little bit about your experience, your personal experience in transitioning Incysus out of the university setting?
It was a process that was in process at that point in time. And you know, I have to say there was a fair amount of confusion then as well about conflict of interest and funds flow from intellectual property royalties and that sort of thing. And really nobody, one of the reasons we had one of our trials in Kansas is because funds would have flowed through my department in order to do that. President Watts had signed off on the conflict of interest plan. The Cancer Center director at that point in time, who's no longer the Cancer Director, refused to allow the study because he was afraid that conflict was, and there was no mechanism for resolving that at the time. So we moved that out. There was no funds flow through neuro-oncology so that we didn't have that issue. From IP, but the next cancer director, Barry Schleckman, came in and had lunch with us in New York, and we sort of put all this on the table for him. And he basically said, "Okay, I can do it. You know, draft a couple documents, and we're good." You know, and,
exactly.
That gave an understanding with everybody, but it's hard. I mean, there were moments when I was throwing the furniture around my office. You know, so. I'm thrilled to see that others have recognized the impasses that were there and the potential for confusion, and have made the what appears to be a Herculean effort to get all this stuff lined up, using are difficult for any startup.
And I absolutely, and I like the comment, because we've definitely reorganized a lot of let's say the furniture in and parts of UAB and working with various departments to understand where a lot of these pitfalls are. So us in establishing this process really does address those things where there's a lot of impasse, and now we have resolutions to which we can ultimately conclude to and provide a startup that's looking to either engage UAB or transition out of UAB with the appropriate answers. And you know, what we've seen is nothing is impossible quite yet. It's just that things need to be addressed as they come, and of course go back to it being a learning experience for all of us. But we are all, I think, headed in the right direction, and especially given the success that all of you startups are having, even in times like this, but also working through our process and at UAB. So Robert, I'm going to come back to you. This is going to be the last question, and we're right on time. So I'm glad that we're all here. But you know, Robert, if you can touch a little bit about kind of what it's been like for you, of course, with looking at this panel. You know, you have Dr. Lam and Andrew who have let's say some experience in innovation and entrepreneurship. You coming out on the graduate student, partnering up with Robert and working through not only learning how to transition a startup out of the university, but then also learning the Birmingham ecosystem as this entrepreneurship venture community. I'm sure you've also experienced, as much as all of us have experienced, how encouraging the environment and the ecosystem is. But could you talk about TruSpin as a startup in Birmingham and kind of some aspects of venture development that required you to look on an expanded network and adjust your approach towards networking in that regard?
Sure, yeah. Some of this is going to sound pretty familiar, similar to Andrew's experience with ACN. One of the things you find out about Birmingham pretty quickly is that most people here are willing to help. If they can't help you, they'll tell you who can. It's just overcoming that inertia at first to get your first meetings. That's the hardest part. But in my experience, business people in Birmingham are eager to speak with researchers from UAB who are particularly bringing breakthroughs to their industry. Your main goal is just to get out and get meetings. And when you do, treat them like learning opportunities rather than sales meetings. Take a notepad, document everything you can, and keep an open mind. Some of the business people you'll talk to might come across as critical. If you have a business plan, they're liable to tear it apart. Don't take it personally. Instead, go home, get some nice stationery out, write them a handwritten letter, thanking them for helping you identify areas for improvement, and then actually fix the things they pointed out. You do this enough times, and you're going to establish a network of people who admire your character. And at the end of the day, these are people who could invest in your company. A good idea gets you in the door, but investors are really, at the end of the day, placing a bet on you. And then how an investment materializes from these relationships really boils down to your ability to identify and capitalize on opportunity. So maybe an industry leader will invest in your company to integrate you into their vertical. Maybe you'll reach a stage of maturity with your business where a venture capital firm can justify investing based on your revenue. You don't really know which way it's going to pan out, but what is certain is that the more of these types of relationships you build up, the more opportunities you'll have when the time comes. And you just have to keep at it. Find people who are willing to talk to you. One thing will lead to another.
Yep. And then it's important that you mention all that, because I think a good theme here that we can all take away, whether it's in UAB, working through our process, and then once you transition out and kind of networking, looking on an expanded network, of course, we're here to help with all of that and do some introductions, but resilience is key. And every single one of you guys in your startups have highlighted why resilience is so important, and you've achieved the success you've achieved because of that resiliency. So we thank you all for joining us. We thank you for your time. We thank you for answering these questions and appreciate it. And we're exactly on time, so I get to have my beer now. That was my little gift to myself if I kept us there. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to Karthik for the next part.
Thanks, Saksham, and thank you, panelists. That is really great. I'd like to introduce all of you, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Jason Nichols. Jason is the Associate Vice President for Research in the Office of Research at UAB. He helps oversee research and business activities relating to UAB's entrepreneurial initiatives, including startup activities and related sponsored programs such as SBIR and SGTR. In addition, Jason is a professor in the School of Optometry and an active faculty investigator. On those lines, recently, Jason was recognized by the American Optometric Association Contact Lens Cornea Section Legends Award. Congratulations, Jason. In his presentation, Jason will be covering these acronyms, EDC, EOC, and the process and the timelines and all those kinds of committees and oversight committees that are set up within UAB to help entrepreneurs be in compliance with UAB rules and Alabama laws. And he also talked about how and when entrepreneurs should engage with those entities. Over to you, Jason.
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in the forum today. And I apologize, I had to join a little bit late, but hopefully what I say isn't redundant. I was able to hear some of the comments that were made about process and different areas that need to be covered. And I think, as you'll see as I talk and speak to this, we've come a long way in that regard. I want to start by saying that UAB is 100% behind what I call its entrepreneurial initiative. We realize that business ventures fueled by the research and innovation of the institution are really important means of commercialization within the academic environment. You know, and you have opportunities spanning intellectual property through out to startups, spin-outs, joint ventures, what have you. This is recognized even in UAB's strategic plan. Strategic objective number 4 is to improve society through processes and products. And one of the primary activities that's specifically called out is to facilitate intellectual property development. So that said, UAB is 100% behind its entrepreneurial initiative. We need to be careful to preserve the integrity of UAB's missions. And it's a complicated space. There's no doubt about it. From those who've spoke and who live in this space, it can be complicated. And in the past, we haven't done so well in providing clarity, perhaps transparency, and what the expectations are around entrepreneurial activities. And why I say it's complicated is because you know, we have laws that sort of bump into the entrepreneurial space. So for example, the Code of Federal Regulations and Conflict of Interest Reporting, the Bayh-Dole Act, the Stark Law, the Open Payment Law, the Alabama State Ethics Law, all in some way can bump into the entrepreneurial initiative. Likewise, we have UAB policies and procedures of which that can sort of bump into the entrepreneurial space, whether it relates to patents or copyrights or external activity reporting, use of UAB resources, use of a computer network, et cetera, et cetera. So you could see we need to keep those in mind as we carve out entrepreneurial opportunities. And so it's really important. It can be a very complicated space. I think from an institutional standpoint, in the past, we've sometimes struggled with go forward decisions, and we're sort of clearing the decks in terms of providing the path for folks along these lines through the Entrepreneurial Development Committee and oversight committees. So in the past, while we had different laws or policies, what have you, they were really viewed or sort of owned by different campus units. And this often created the frustrations that our entrepreneurs experienced in not knowing who to go to, or perhaps in terms of getting conflicting advice or information from folks. So we need to clearly define sort of the navigation space where startups will live and be developed, if you will. So along these lines, what I would say is that you continue to work with the HIE along the lines of these opportunities. So licensing option agreements, it's the HIE that will start the vetting process with you about startups, and it's sort of an evolution. You bring them the technology, the IP, and then that sort of perhaps develops into discussion of what you're going to do with it. And of course, one example of what you might do with it is go forward with a startup. As the HI works with you, they will then sort of work with our group, the Entrepreneur Development Committee, to say, you know what, this startup we think is going to be a success and we want to take it to the next level. At that time, we would then draw it into the Entrepreneurial Development Committee, which will help obviously develop it along these lines. So the Entrepreneurial Development Committee will work with the startup, your school, department, faculty, staff, early on to help you facilitate and develop the opportunity of the business. The Entrepreneurial Development Committee is a group that I chair. It has representatives from the Office of Compliance, Office of Counsel, OSP, the Vice President of Finance and Administration. The IIE has representation, and in addition to faculty Senate appointees, there are two, of which Andrew Smith is one, as I see him in my screen there. So the idea is that the Entrepreneurial Development Committee can help in a cohesive way really address all of these related issues, whether it's conflict of interest, use of resources, legal issues, what have you. And so that's where we really can get everybody around the table, including the sometimes investigator, the PI, their leadership, if we need to. Once the EDC has developed the opportunity, we then have what's called an Entrepreneurial Oversight Committee, which is really advised and informed by the Development Committee. The Oversight Committee consists of the senior leadership of the university, so Provost, Vice President for Research, Dean of Medicine, Kathy, myself, Chief Compliance and Chief Legal Counsel for UAB. And at the right time, we would engage the EOC if there are institutional issues that we need to address specifically outside of what the Entrepreneurial Development Committee can make. So that's sort of the processes, if you will, that we've developed over the last year and a half. The last thing I would point to, and I'm not sure if it was mentioned on the call earlier, but I really want to plug the Entrepreneurial Startup Guidebook that we have developed, the Entrepreneurial Development Committee developed. It's available in PDF form on the HIE website. We very much consider it to be a living document. So I think in the winter or springtime, we updated it substantially as it relates to SBIRs and STTRs. And so please use it. It's there because it sets the expectations or the environment, what we allow, what we don't allow in terms of roles and responsibilities, conflict issues, and in addition to business development activities. So I think it'd be great to, we appreciate your feedback on it as well. If anybody has comments or feedback, we're always interested in that as it relates to the documentation. So hopefully that provides an overview of what we've done and where we're heading. And I'm not sure if Karthik, you want to take questions or you have questions or how you want to proceed here.
I have been monitoring the chat rooms, and there are no specific questions that have come up that are to be addressed to the panelists or to you, Jason, so far. But let me give it one last look.
Jason, one thing I noticed is that, you can actually easily reach those documents with a Google search, let alone going to the HIIE website. So it makes it pretty convenient to find how to disclose an invention. You just invention disclosure, UAB, and you're there. You want to look up UAB startup guide, just a Google search, and you're there.
Thank you. Yeah, good point.
Okay, so I do not see any further questions. So on that note, maybe it's time to kind of close this out. So thanks so much, Jason. That is very illuminative and helpful, very, very clear. And also, obviously, to our panelists, Robert, Larry, and Andrew, for spending their time with us today. Thanks to the CTL for helping us get this platform for us to make these presentations, and obviously the HIIE team that helped put this all together, with a special shout out in this case to Saksham for emceeing the whole event, and in a broader way to Brianna Bryant for coordinating the various pieces that went into it. So we really hope the series of 2 webinars was helpful to you, our audience, to understand the potential of your IP. In organizing the series, we thought it's best to hear directly from the PIs. And in the first instance, we heard from the PIs whose technologies were licensed in the previous webinar last month. And obviously in this particular webinar, we heard from PIs who went the entrepreneurial route and started companies. We thought this is best so that you can appreciate the nuances and the opportunities for commercializing IP directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak. We also wanted to highlight the legal requirements, the policies, and most importantly, the resources that are available to you all to help you advance your IP for maximum impact. In addition, that was already mentioned, and several people mentioned the annual Student Startup Bootcamp, and obviously that's a fantastic program. I'd also like to mention and put a plug in for the I-Core program that is run by Molly Waska. And I think Andrew participated in the I-Core program, and I'm sure it is helpful for him. And I would encourage all of you to reach out to HIIE to understand more about all of the above at any time. So this webinar has been recorded and should be available to view quite soon. If you think your colleagues would find it to be helpful and could not participate today. That's it from all of us folk. Have a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.